Hey again, good morning to everybody watching us live, and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching the recordings later on Facebook or YouTube. This is our edition of My Empowered Political Life for April 2nd, 2025. We are glad you're here, so thank you so much. Um, Today's a doozy, I admit. Today's one of the more serious things we're going to cover. It's one of the more intense things we're going to cover. It's a bit of an emotional subject. So we might go a few minutes longer than normal today. We're going to be very thorough today because I want to make sure I get everything right and make sure we understand the implications. I am wondering if this is the story that finally wakes us up to what's happening and to the need to take some real action to do something about it. So today we're talking about an innocent father sent to a brutal foreign jail. And that's right. That's literally just what happened. And I want to talk today about what's at stake. Before we get to our normal segments, let's be very clear about what's at stake in this story. A real human being's life is at stake, along with the well being of his family, and our very concept of justice and due process for all. And if it can happen to him, it can happen to you, because if some people don't get justice and due process, then none of us do. We're talking about Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. You may have heard something about this story. It started to break yesterday, and today it's starting to get a lot more coverage, which is excellent. I appreciate it. And so, before we get into our normal background and current events segments, we're going to talk about this real human being and his story, Mr. Abrego Garcia, because we are not going to just other him. We're not going to say it's just some guy or it's just some immigrant. We're not going to say he's an animal. This is a human being, and we're going to learn about this human being before we get into it. So, Mr. Abrego Garcia was born in El Salvador. He fled that country as a teenager to escape gang violence, and he did initially enter the United States illegally. By 2019, he had obtained permission to remain in the United States because a judge ruled that he could not be deported because of threats to his safety in El Salvador. The judge found in the order the Barrio 18 gang was targeting him and threatening him because of his family's pupusa business and threatened to kill him. He has a well-founded fear of future persecution. Since 2019, Abrego Garcia has become a husband and a father, and his family are all U.S. citizens here. He has become a productive member of society, holding down a middle-class job as a sheet metal worker. So I'm going to repeat because this is incredibly important fact as we move forward and you see what happened. Abrego Garcia has legal permission to remain in the United States according to our regular, normal immigration system. Now, ICE has previously accused him of being a member of MS-13 based on literally nothing more than an allegation by an anonymous person in a Home Depot parking lot. That is all they had, as far as I can tell. And we're going to talk more about that. That person claimed that Abrego Garcia was a member of MS-13 in Long Island, New York. Now, Abrego Garcia has never lived there, so the allegation itself didn't make any sense. The government has presented, to this point, no evidence that Abrego Garcia is part of a gang or that he has committed any crimes. All right, now let's get to our background. Just a quick background, a reminder, because there is a greater context here. As you'll recall, the government has been, quote, arresting immigrants over the last few weeks in unusual and extra legal fashion. I put arresting in quotes because they are doing this without deportation orders and without arrest warrants. And we have discussed in a previous episode the few hundred alleged Venezuelan gang members who were sent to a brutal and sadistic prison in El Salvador. Now, I am not the only person to call this place brutal and sadistic. That's widely considered to be that. It's widely considered to be one of the worst prisons in the planet. And we also discussed the fact that some of those people turned out to be innocent. The government admitted in court that they made mistakes, and not all of those people were actually gang members. We also, in previous episodes, discussed the arrest of people who are here legally and who have been accused of no crimes or gang affiliation. We talked about Mahmoud Khalil. His case got a lot of attention, rightfully. He was accosted by unidentified officers in front of his wife. We even showed the video of that happening. And we talked about Remeza Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who was accosted by masked unidentified people on the street. And we showed the video of that as well. Federal judges have ordered people released from ICE custody and ordered them returned to the United States in many of these cases. And the government so far has been stalling, obfuscating, and or ignoring those court orders. They have yet to fully comply with any of them. So now what's happening now? And here's the troubling facts. ICE arrested Abrego Garcia as part of its mass arrest of alleged Venezuelan gang members. Now remember, he's not from Venezuela, and there is no actual evidence that he's a gang member. Abrego Garcia's son is 5 years old and is disabled. He stays with his grandma while his parents work during the day. So what did ICE do? ICE staked out grandma's house, waiting for Abrego Garcia to show up and pick up his child. And he was then apprehended in front of his family. Abrego Garcia's wife had no idea where he was taken and could get no information from ICE. Turns out he was put on an airplane with an accused gang members and taken to the notorious Secot prison in El Salvador. This really is notorious. There are entire articles about how it's one of the most brutal and sadistic prisons on earth. It's full of violent gang members. And the guards are apparently notorious for their horrible treatment of the prisoners. Lawyers for Abrego Garcia's family filed suit to have him released. They emphasized he was in the country legally. He had no criminal record. He's a productive member of society. And the government had presented no evidence of any gang affiliation or any crimes committed. The government's argument is rather astonishing in its audacity. So I'm going to quote directly from the government's briefing because I want you to know I'm not mischaracterizing the government's argument. I'm quoting right from they said in court. So from the government's briefing, plaintiffs have not shown a likelihood they will suffer an irreparable injury absent their requested TRO. TRO is a temporary restraining order. So to get a TRO, you have to show that you may suffer an irreparable injury. The government is saying that Abrego Garcia getting killed in an El Salvadorian prison is not an irreparable injury. Now, remember, a previous immigration judge has already said there are credible threats to his life in El Salvador, the place where they just set them. And the government is saying that losing a husband and father to a U.S. citizen family here, possibly forever, is not an irreparable injury. Also from the government's briefing, although ICE was aware of his protection from removal to El Salvador, Abrego Garcia was removed to El Salvador because of an administrative error. Now, the government does not explain what that administrative error is. They do not explain how it could happen or what happened. They're just saying, we made a mistake. The government then said, a custodian with the power to produce Abrego Garcia must be physically present within the jurisdiction of this court for this court to exercise jurisdiction. This is a bit of legalese for saying the person who holds Abrego Garcia has to be in the US. Otherwise, the court can't do anything about it. So since we sent him to El Salvador, the person who holds him is in El Salvador, and there's nothing to be done. The government then said there's no showing that any payment made to El Salvador is yet to occur, no showing that El Salvador is likely to release CCOT detainees, but for any such payment. No showing that El Salvador is even inclined to consider a request to release a detainee at the United States request. Now, you may have heard the reporting, it's widespread reporting at this point, that the United States has paid El Salvador millions of dollars to hold these people because these are people who were in U.S. custody and in the U.S. And we're now paying El Salvador to hold them. So the government here is effectively saying, if you can't prove that the wire transfer was made, then maybe it wasn't made. Maybe there was no payment. And they're saying that the United States has no influence over the people or over El Salvador, even over the prisoners that the United States sent and is apparently paying for. The government stated he, Abrego Garcia, had the opportunity to give evidence tending to show he was not part of MS-13, which he did not proffer. Now, this is apparently initially in reference to a hearing before an ICE officer 5 years ago. We have no idea if Abrego Garcia was there, if he was represented by counsel, how much due process he received. And I'm not really sure how you prove you're not part of a gang. It seems to me, normally, the government, if they are claiming you're part of a gang, they should prove you are. But they are just going to assume he's part of the gang and he has to prove he's not. And then by extension, they have also said he hasn't proved it now, but how could he prove it now? He's in El Salvador. He not only cannot prove a negative, he cannot even try to do it if he's in an El Salvadorian prison. The government stated an injunction as plaintiff's request would harm the public interest by preventing the executive from implementing a unified course of conduct for the United States foreign affairs. So it's not in the public interest to have an innocent man who even they admit was mistakenly sent there returned. And they're saying this is now a foreign policy issue because we sent him out of the country. It's a foreign policy issue. The courts cannot be involved. The administration could do whatever it wants. We have some interesting quotes from members of the administration and Republicans on trying to justify what's happened here. So our Vice President, J.D. Vance, according to the court document you apparently didn't read, he was a convicted MS-13 gang member with no legal right to be here. My further comment is that it's gross to get fired up about gang members getting deported while ignoring citizens they victimize. Now, to be clear, J.D. Vance is lying here. How do I know? I read the court document. Everybody who's read the court document knows he's lying. Abrego Garcia was not a convicted gang member, and he did have legal permission to be here. That is undisputed in court. So he is lying. And he says it's gross to get fired up about gang members. Again, there is no evidence that he's a gang member. Senator Ted Cruz was asked by some reporters from the Bulwark about his reaction. It's not surprising that the Bulwark's focus is defending alleged Venezuelan gang members. Listen, I've talked to too many Americans whose children were raped and murdered by these animals. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Again, there is no evidence that Abrego Garcia is a gang member. Even the allegation is based on the flimsiest of circumstances. And you will note his use of the word animals, which is deliberately dehumanizing. You call people animals to dehumanize them so that you don't have to empathize with their suffering, so that you don't have to argue that they need due process of law, so that you don't have to defend their rights. Our press secretary, Caroline Levitt, shame on you and shame on the mainstream media for trying to cover for these individuals. This is a vicious gang that has taken the lives of American women. Again, there is no evidence that Abrego Garcia was part of any gang or took anyone's lives. Another quote from our press secretary. We have credible intelligence this individual was involved in human trafficking. This individual was a member of the brutal and vicious MS-13 gang. Great. Where's the intelligence? Where's the evidence? In the initial hearing 5 years ago, when Abrego Garcia was allowed to stay, the government had no evidence of any of this. And in the court case now that he's been sent abroad, the government's presented none of this evidence. In fact, the government admitted they made a mistake. So you can't have it both ways. Either you have the evidence and you present it and you charge him with a crime and allow him to defend himself in court, or if you don't have the evidence, then it was a mistake. They're trying to have it both ways. And I will note that the press secretary can say anything they want in public, but in court, the Department of Justice lawyers have to file their briefing under penalty of perjury. And under penalty of perjury, the Department of Justice admitted this was a mistake and presented no evidence whatsoever. So some of these stories are tough. I get it. But if you want to hear more, hopefully they won't all be this tough. We have some more lighthearted stories, hopefully coming up. We have a bunch of stories planned out. Please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. We have a playlist of all these videos. You can subscribe to that playlist as well. And if you want more people to see this, please share it with your friends. Share it with anyone you think might be interested. Help more people see what we're doing and get out the word. All right. Let's get into doors and corners. This is our segment. We're just like a detective, a police detective walking into a possibly dangerous situation. We are going to look behind the doors and look around the corners, and we're going to think about what might be coming. We have to think ahead here. The downstream implications of the government's argument court are staggering, to say the least. So to sum up their argument, they're saying it's your job to prove that you are not part of a violent gang. They don't have to prove you are. You have to prove you're not. Indeed, they can just assume you are part of the gang based on one anonymous allegation where even the facts in that allegation don't make sense. Or maybe no allegation because we have no idea who this supposed informant is. Once the government sends you to El Salvador, the U.S. courts have no jurisdiction to bring you back. And the administration has no interest in even trying to bring you back, even when they admit in court that it was a mistake. Let's be very clear about what this means in real life practice. Someone can accuse you of being in a gang, again, or not, because we don't know. The government can then arrest you without any arrest warrant and without any deportation order. They can send you to El Salvador very quickly before anyone has time to figure out what happened or file a lawsuit. It does not matter whether you were in the US legally or have permission to be here or whether you committed any crimes, because they're not even going to allege any crimes. And you then stay in a brutal El Salvadorian prison indefinitely, and nobody can do anything about it. I want to take this one step further. If they can do this without even alleging you committed a crime, if they can do this when you have permission to be in the country, then nobody can ever bring you back after you've been sent to a foreign nation. And this is the case even when the government admits it made a mistake. So that means our immigration laws no longer have any practical meaning. They might as well not exist anymore. It means the government can arrest anybody, anytime, anywhere, for any reason. And so long as the person is sent to a foreign nation before the lawsuit is filed, you might never come back. The government's argument in this case functionally is, whoopsie, our bad, but hey, what can you do? Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I know what lots of you are thinking. But Ian, I'm a US citizen. And my response is, so what? Are you so sure that's going to protect you? Because here's the thing. If the government does this to you, You won't have any due process. There will be no court hearing. There will be no opportunity to prove your citizenship before you are shipped off to a brutal foreign prison. And then once you're there, the government will argue that nobody can bring you back. So what if you're a US citizen? They nab you, they put you on a plane, they send you off. And the whole time you'll be screaming, but I'm a citizen, and nobody's going to listen. There's going to be no court hearing. There's going to be no evidence. There's going to be no facts. We all have to stop thinking this would never happen to me. It's time to stop thinking that. It's time to stop thinking this only happens to those people. Sometimes I'd like to leave us with quotes of the day. Today I have four of them. So, quote of the day number one: they claim that the court is powerless to order any relief. If that's true, the immigration laws are meaningless, all of them, because the government can deport whoever they want, wherever they want, whenever they want, and no court can do anything about it once it's done. This is from Abrego Garcia's attorney. Our second quote of the day: I'd go further than Abrego Garcia's lawyer. If this reckless and lawless action by the administration is allowed to stand, it's not just the immigration laws that are meaningless, it's the rule of law that is meaningless. This is from Bill Kristol, longtime Republican and conservative commentator. He's served in Republican administrations. In a world where there is no due process for some, there is no due process for any of us. This is from Susan Rice, our former national security advisor and former ambassador to the United Nations. Now, our final quote of the day is from Tim Miller, longtime Republican political and campaign operative and now host of the Bulwark's flagship podcast. His quote is something that I am hoping is obvious to all of us, and we are just going to leave us on this quote today. It's bad to send people to a torture dungeon in another fucking country with no due process. I'll see you guys tomorrow.